And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, is this non-dairy creamer truly organic? And will this finally be the day Geraldo Rivera's constant nosebleeds short out his microphone? And now, the podcast host who is always fully manscaped for Mondays, Pete Dominic.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Pete Co, for yet another stellar opening, asking very important questions there at the top and plugging my hygiene. Thank you very much to listeners Therese and Megan. Speaking of hygiene, I talked about the toothbrush gate. My daughter got caught using my toothbrush, then my other daughter's toothbrush. It was a horrible and disgusting thing and a terrible way to open the show. But over the weekend, I met with Megan and Therese, who accommodated me by coming over to my neck of the woods, and we went for a walk. And it's just so great to see you guys and connect you guys, and now you connecting with each other. They met for the first time. It was very cool, and I hope to meet all of you soon, one way or another. We'll get together. We'll figure it out. How's your Monday going so far? Happy Monday to you if you're listening here on the 24th of May, the final week of May. I had a great weekend, got a lot done. Operation Backyard Revival or Renovation. The garden move going well, getting a lot of exercise. Beautiful weekend of weather here in the Northeast. Hopefully it was where you are. And also got to get my daughter vaccinated on yesterday afternoon. Was on MSNBC Saturday night, and we had a great weekend. Hopefully you did too. Lots to talk about with you here at the top. Want to remind you, tomorrow night, anybody who wants to contribute to the show and growing the program, the first ever meeting of Team Stand Up at 7 o'clock Tuesday night. If you're a subscriber, you can join me. If you aren't, subscribe right now. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic to support this daily show. And thank you very much for listening to it today. Let's get to the news. This is week one, by the way. First full week of me hosting the program, doing it in the morning. I get up now at 4 in the morning to get the program, the show ready and uploaded for you to listen to, especially those that want it hot, fresh, daily in the morning, and going so far so well. I did it a few days. It's crazy to change your schedule from going to bed at 2, 3 a.m., getting up at 8, 9 a.m. to going to bed at 8, 9 p.m. and getting up at 4 a.m. If you've done something like that, you know what I'm talking about. But so far, those of you that have commented on it said, I sound very energetic. Well, thank you. I feel it. I'm good. I'm high on the caffeine, ready to go. So let's hit all the news I can get to in the last 24 right now. Okay, well, it is Monday, so you had a lot of audio from the Sunday shows that I've selected for you to go through, trying to hit some of the most important topics and issues that they covered. Couple of headlines before I get to audio. It was a great weekend for one 50 and over white guy, and not as much for another. But yeah, Rick Santorum is out as CNN commentator, so that's not good for him. But it is great for the rest of us because he has been bad for a really long time. And Phil Mickelson is 50 years old, and he won the PGA championship. So a lot of really rich white guys and golfers. Aren't they the same thing? I kid the middle class and lower income golf folks. Come on. Thank you for listening. Who are you people? We do live in America, so there was a lot of gun violence over the weekend. And also we found out more about this horrible violent arrest from 2019 involving Louisiana State Police because they had to release all of the footage related to Ronald Green's arrest and murder. A lot of talk about that on the Sunday shows. Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend is reportedly going to cooperate in a sex trafficking probe, which is great. I cannot wait till she writes a book and makes millions off of that disgrace, I'm hoping. The plot thickens in the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Guards have admitted to falsifying records about checking on him. They're apparently likely to avoid jail time somehow, which is just crazy, that story. I hope we learn the truth about what happened there at some point. Starting to think Bill Gates tested out the vaccine microchip on Epstein first to get it right, if you know what I'm saying. You make jokes about conspiracy theories, but the jokes that you're making, the things that you say, make up like I did just now off the cuff, stupid things that make no sense, really, if you peel back a layer or two. Well, guess what? A lot of Americans believe in them and even vote for people who are also believe in them and are elected to Congress. And that's why I got to mention this Marjorie Taylor Greene story. That's coming up. And good news over the weekend, because the very tenuous situation in the Middle East is holding a ceasefire there, holding as of yesterday, despite confrontations between Israeli police and Palestinian protesters in Jerusalem, according to Reuters. And a new study is saying that 2 weeks after the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, it was 88% effective against the Indian variant, the variant that was detected in India. So that's really good news. By the way, yesterday when we took my daughter to get vaccinated, there was this poor, 12, 13-year-old girl who was just terrified. And the entire time we were there, which is maybe 35 minutes, she refused to get it. And she was just crying in her mother's arms. And the dad just stood there with his arms crossed. And the whole scene was horrible. What are you seeing? Are you seeing young people be afraid like that? And if you work at any of these vaccination sites, I'd love to hear what your experience has been, period. And two more sad headlines over the weekend. Extreme weather killed 21 in a 62-mile race in China. 21 people died during one of these Ultraman races. And I don't know how that happened, but the weather reportedly changed suddenly hours into the event. And just a crazy story coming out of China. And speaking of foreign crazy stories, sad news from Italy, where a cable broke in a cable car and at least 14 people are dead. So just awful, but I'll mention the awful headlines to keep it real and give us all perspective on where we're at in our lives and the concerns that we have about the world and our life. And in this moment, you're listening to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, your pal, and we're talking, and I'm telling you about what's happening in the world, and I hope everything is going okay for you. Well, everything is not going okay for Marjorie Taylor Greene, or maybe it is. Maybe it's going excellently, because that woman can say anything and not seemingly have consequences. I guess she's been taking off her committee chairs because of her insane idea to create like this white supremacist caucus. But she's still a congresswoman from Georgia. I actually found out who is trying to run against her. A guy named Marcus Flowers. I reached out to him. He's an Army veteran. He is running to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene at Marcus for Georgia. You want to look him up. He looks great, and hopefully I'll get him on the program. But anyway, Marjorie Taylor Greene compared the Holocaust to having to wear masks. She was on some right-wing podcast, and listen for yourself.
You know, we can look back in a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about.
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene is out on tour, the crazy clown tour with Congressman Matt Gaetz. Apparently, they're drawing big crowds. And she had the opportunity to walk those comments back when a reporter asked her at one of these carnivals of crazy. And here's what she said.
I stand by all of my statements. I said nothing wrong. And I think any rational Jewish person didn't like what happened in Nazi Germany, and any rational Jewish person doesn't like what's happening with overbearing mask mandates and overbearing vaccine policies.
Do you understand, though, why some would be upset and offended by the comment?
Well, do you understand how people feel about being forced to wear masks or being forced to have to take a vaccine or even have to say that whether they've taken it or not? These are just things that shouldn't be happening in America. This is a free country.
Oh, my God. She's absolutely nuts. Any rational Jewish person, you know somebody at some point coached her not to say Jew. You know she means to. Her instinct is to say Jew, but she says Jewish. And I'm positive at some point that changed. I'm not going to look into it, but that's my guess. Anyway, all rational Jewish people are horrified by such a comparison. I wonder if anybody has had the temerity to ask a Holocaust survivor to weigh in on that comparison, or if they just went on their TikTok accounts and did. But let's go to CNN's Jim Acosta, who had my friends Margaret Hoover and John Avlon on for a reaction. Hoovalon, I like that Jim Acosta says this.
This latest incident comparing mask mandates to the Holocaust, John, I think her brain is broken.
I don't think there's any other conclusion you can drive, but I think the concern here is about the GOP recognizing that they've incubated this particular flavor of crazy and a refusal to clearly condemn it from the leadership. So Liz Cheney denouncing the big lie is something that gets you kicked out of leadership, but they're afraid to alienate the crazy caucus by clearly condemning completely absurd and frankly evil Holocaust metaphors having to do with mask mandates during a pandemic and the murder of 6 million people.
What do you think, Margaret?
It reminds me, as I think about the fall of the modern American conservative movement from Buckley to Marjorie Taylor Greene, of the Eric Hoffer quote, which Buckley's biographer notes, something begins as a movement, devolves into a business, and then becomes, I'm paraphrasing, a racket. Now it's just all conspiracy theories, Jim. And when you talk to members who voted for conviction, who voted to impeach in the House of Representatives, from Adam Kinzinger to Liz Cheney, I mean, the thing that they're fighting behind the scenes is conspiracy theories, right? That is what has overtaken the Republican Party and the conservative base of the Republican Party. And this is, needless to say, a cancer on the party, but it's awful for our democracy when one party is overtaking, especially a party has been devoid of the center right, a stabilizing force in terms of the ballast of a party, in terms of upholding the Constitution, and has just descended into lies, and you don't have a leadership that is willing to stand up to it. And this is very, very concerning.
Well,
and
I just love it. I love that they go on together, that they have a segment like that. And just John's reaction right there at the end, just, kind of punctuating Margaret's ending. She's like, it's all very concerning. And you John just go, well, let's listen to it one more time.
Concerning.
Well, that's an understatement, sweetheart. Love those guys. Okay, so let's get serious, folks. Come on, stop with the nonsense. Here is Republican Congressman Peter Meyer, who is just astonished by Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments.
Any comparisons to the Holocaust, it's beyond reprehensible. This is, I don't even have words to describe how disappointing it is to see this hyperbolic speech that frankly amps up and plays into a lot of the anti-Semitism that we've been seeing in our society today. Vicious attacks on the streets of New York and in Los Angeles, that should be, and I do condemn that in the strongest terms. There is no excuse for that.
And that is why I'm playing these clips. That is why this is an important issue. Some might be listening and say, I don't want to hear about this. I don't care about this. This is gossip. This is a crazy person saying crazy things. But I think it's important to know just how crazy they are, the elected leaders, as well as what they are saying and what it results. Words matter. Actions matter. Consequences often happen as a result of this type of language. And I think we've seen that across this country and across the world forever. We always have. People's horrible, violent actions and reprehensible policies being a conclusion, starting with the kind of words and rhetoric they use. That's why it's not political correctness. It's dangerous. And we have to be more careful about how we talk. Because it could end up in insurrection in the Capitol. And that is where we go to next here, because the idea that there should be a bipartisan commission to look into January 6th is something that vast Americans agree with. Unfortunately, Republicans in Congress, again, don't. Yeah, 35 in the House did vote for it, and it passed overwhelmingly bipartisan support to create this bipartisan commission. But guess what? It's gone to the Senate where it will die. So what do we do now? Horrible, horrible situation politically. We've got to look into this. Here again is Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who is on Fox News Sunday talking about this issue with Chris Wallace.
Congressman, with several congressional committees in both the House and Senate investigating the events of January 6th, Are there questions, and if so, what are they, the biggest questions that you think a commission would be able to answer, but that these committees will not be able to answer?
Yeah, certainly. So let's keep in mind the investigations that are ongoing are things like into specific criminal actions. That's why you've seen 400 people arrested. That's what the FBI can do. There can be discussions about, did house security fail? But what we need is a comprehensive look at what happened that led up to January 6th. Who was talking to who? What were the lies? I mean, here's the truth, Chris. The American people, and it's Sunday, and you learn in Sunday school, truth matters. The American people deserve the truth. And my party to this point has said things like it was hugs and kisses, it was Antifa and BLM, it was anything but what it was, which was a Trump-inspired insurrection on the Capitol. And people deserve to hear the truth. And I think now what's going to happen if this thing fails is that Nancy Pelosi will run a select committee, and this could go all the way to 2024.
Wow, great job. Great answer by Adam Kinzinger. I mean, Chris Wallace gave him the answer that a conservative is going to be able to get away with. And Adam Kinzinger didn't take the bait. And certainly he's looking at the politics of this not only in the near term, but in the long term as well. And I want to give you the perspective of two other somewhat sane Republicans, but yet still problematic in their answers. Of course, first here is the legendary conservative writer George Will, who I've never liked, who has always, I think, been dishonest about things like climate change and trickle-down economics. But here he is. I think he's 80 years old on ABC This Week on Sunday.
Susan Collins says she's still optimistic for something going forward on this January 6th commission. It's kind of hard to believe it's even controversial.
Well, it's controversial for one reason. We have something new in American history. That is a political party defined by the terror it feels for its own voters. That's the Republican Party right now. Every elected official is frightened of his voters, therefore doesn't respect his voters, doesn't like his voters, and is afraid that a vote for this will be seen as an insult to the 45th president. There's no reason. I mean, McConnell has a point. There are going to be lots of investigations. Journalists are going to go through this. There are 450-some criminal charges now being brought, with 100 more probably to come. So there's going to be lots of information about this. I would like to see January 6th is burned into the American mind as firmly as 9/11, because it was that scale of shock to the system. And I think there will be a commission, but it is controversial for that reason.
Okay, well, I don't know why he thinks there's going to be a commission. I mean, there has to be a commission. I have to talk to some experts on what could be next if it isn't created by Congress. But George Will is laid the part of the ground that got people to that crazy. He did. He absolutely did. Read some of his old stuff. Also, here's another Republican, Sarah Isgur, who I think is also problematic in this answer with a false equivalency, but lays out, I think, even more clearly and honestly about why Republicans don't want to have this commission be created, why they don't want what we don't know to come out, how they might be involved as well.
I wish that the Republicans were being more honest. We're hearing lots of reasons. We can't hire Republican staff. It'll be partisan in this. The real reason is they need 5 seats to take back the House. They need 1 seat to take back the Senate. And they're asking themselves, is this in our political interest to have this commission? And the answer is no. So they're going to vote against it. I think everything that George said is correct as well. But when it comes down to it, Nancy Pelosi has made clear that she thinks Democrats benefit from this commission and the Republicans think they don't. They think they can take back the House in 2022. Everything about the history of midterm elections in an opposition party says that they can get those 5 seats. Why do anything that wouldn't be in their interest? I wish that the Republicans were being more honest.
Well, wishing isn't going to get you there, and Republicans haven't been honest for a long time, Sarah. I think you should know that by now. Over on CBS, John Dickerson had Russell Honore on, and he was in charge of creating an investigation. He did an investigation after the January 6th insurrection on how to better secure the Capitol. And so he has a lot of integrity on this issue for his entire career. I'm not going to go through it, but you got to just listen to it for his comments, and even for the end of it when you hear John Dickerson try so hard to get him to wrap up by increasingly making noises. It's worth it. Listen to it.
Let me ask you about that day, because urgency for this supplemental funding kind of depends on the way people look back on the 6th of January. I'd like to play a clip here from Congressman Andrew Clyde of Georgia, who recently emphasized some of the video on January 6th. Let's listen to what he has to say.
You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
Now, that's true of some of the footage, but there's also a great deal of the other kind of footage, some of which was released this week of the rioters celebrating hurting a policeman. You looked at this situation on the 6th. How would you characterize what the police had to face on that day?
They had to face a dangerous, violent mob that fought them, tried to kill them. Look, the Capitol Police have taken 2, what we may usually say 3 killed in action. 2 on that day, 1 directly and 1 indirectly from suicide, and subsequent attack that killed the Capitol Police. This is a tough mission. The Capitol will have to be protected 365. What I'm afraid of, John, is when I hear statements like that, is that we have a 2-party system that normally would be referred to as a minority party, the opposition. And that scares me. They've gone from being a minority party to an opposition party, and to borrow the words from Nancy Reagan, they just say no. This is serious business. It's about their security. And right now we have the security to secure the Capitol, but that does not include the mission to have it open to the public, which all of them, both sides of houses, both parties, want the Capitol be open to the public. And this funding is needed. So if they don't fund it, they don't have it. But I think they want the Capitol Police to have current, up-to-date riot equipment. I think they want the Capitol Police to have the security and harden the Capitol. So they're going to have to sit down and talk their way through this. But I don't think waiting on regional police to come to your need is an answer.
All right.
I mean, that right there was a masterclass in respectfully trying to let your guests know you got to wrap it up. And they wish they didn't have to wrap it up, by the way. That's why podcasts are so great, because you don't have a tight hour where you have to fit in, 12 minutes of advertisements and get to it and end what needs to be a nuanced, thought-provoking, thoughtful conversation. But John Dickerson is the best of the best at that. All right, 2 quick clips on COVID-related issues. Here first is my friend Ali Velshi on MSNBC. He had Dr. Erwin Redlander on, and they were talking about schools and masks and how, since kids still aren't vaccinated, should they still have to wear masks to school? Which, by the way, there's only a couple more weeks left of school, but I think it's important to have this conversation now, because when they go back in the fall, are kids going to be vaccinated? I think it's doubtful, although what is the answer to that? Well, here it is.
We've seen that there is a lot of activity on the part of those who are not just vaccine resistant, but the idea that there are a whole bunch of people in this country, as we know, who are mask resistant. The data released on Friday by the CDC about children shows that the COVID-19 incidence was 37% lower in schools that required teachers and staff members to use masks, and 39% lower in schools that improved ventilation. So the risk to children is not gone, but there's nothing that indicates that we should be removing masking and from teachers and children in schools just yet.
Right, and one of the things that's been challenging is trying to deal with the CDC message that came out about 10 days ago saying that if you're vaccinated, you can take off your mask everywhere. And everywhere had many, many exceptions to it. Medical facilities, nursing homes, transport hubs, and schools. In general, right now, for children, as far as we know, as far as we're recommending, children need to be, and teachers need to be wearing masks in the classroom. We need to accelerate the vaccination rates in those schools, and we must make sure that the ventilation systems are doing their job. And those are the things that will keep kids safe until we get the spread of this disease and the threat to children more under control.
So what are your thoughts on masks and schools, and when will kids be vaccinated, and should schools mandate vaccination on this like they do other vaccines? Love to hear from you. StandUpWithPete@gmail.com. And now let's go once more back to CBS Face the Nation's John Dickerson, who had former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb on the program, and asked him about a statistic that looks like good news.
We have been piling up some good numbers in the last couple of weeks. We've been meeting together, but I wanted to focus on one. We're going to put up on the screen the decline in hospitalizations for people to see. What does that say to you, that graph?
It shows really a rapidly declining overall vulnerability of the U.S. population. I think we're still seeing a lot of cases per day, about 20,000 cases per day yesterday. And cases may not fall much below 10,000 because we're doing a lot of testing around the country. But the bottom line is that the people who are getting infected now tend to be people who are younger, less vulnerable to the infection, because a lot of the vulnerable population has been vaccinated. About 85% of those above the age of 65 have now been vaccinated. So the people most likely to get into trouble with COVID have now been protected through vaccination. And you're seeing a rapidly declining rate of new hospitalizations as a consequence of that fact.
Okay, that's promising news, isn't it? All right, last thing I want to play for you right now comes from MSNBC, The Week with Joshua Johnson. And this is a clip of, me. It's a clip of me. That's right. I appeared on 3 segments of Joshua's show on Saturday night because I'm good at reading, researching, talking to experts about important news related items and policy issues, and then regurgitating the best of it in an effective way in sound bites on cable news. And so here I am doing just that, executing, I will say, on the issue, which actually is interesting. I don't think much about the royal family or read much about it, but I do think a lot about mental health and media. And I think this story touches on both those. So I was able to actually be seriously passionate about it. And, well, here it is, talking about the royal family, the absurdity of the story of Martin Bashir, making up stories to Princess Di to get her to do a sit-down interview with him. And, well, here it is.
Pete, what about that in terms of Martin Bashir's role in this? He has said that he is still proud of the interview. He has also said that the suggestion that he essentially precipitated the rift with the royal family and her subsequent death is unreasonable and unfair.
He stinks. He's disgraced. His career is over. He's destroyed. There are very few things. I mean, when you were on my podcast, as a matter of fact, we talked about this, Josh. We talked about how a journalist can destroy their career. And you talked about plagiarism. You talked about making up sources. In this case, Martin Bashir and the BBC, who's also disgraced, their biggest ever journalistic scoop was only achieved because a reporter told a vulnerable Princess Diana a pack of lies. These 2 boys walked behind their dead mother's coffin in front of 1 billion people while Elton John was singing Candle in the Wind. If that were any of us, I would be a drunk trash bag living on a sidewalk for the last 10 years of my life. It's hard to call out your family, much less publicly, much less the royal family. But what he is doing, talking about mental health, is carrying on the work that his mother did, being honest about this. And, I mean, lastly, I would just quote a British columnist who wrote in The Guardian, Marina Hyde, wrote a column in The Guardian, from Diana to Harry, damaged people do damage and sometimes very damaging things. But it's important to remember, as far as the royal family is concerned, that the public likes it so much better that way. Royal pain sells a lot more than royal happiness.
Well, and Rena, that's the other...
Your boy nailed it! On MSNBC Saturday night. That was a lot of fun. I was good to include the quote there at the end, right? To quote someone who is far more articulate and paying close attention in this story as it has played out in her country. Great columnist there from The Guardian. But at the end, when I read that quote there, I had it up on the screen in front of me and I couldn't find it. And I started panic. I had a full panic sweat for probably all of a second and a half. I thought I was going to have to look for that on national TV. I'm like, and then what is it? Oh, but I nailed it. I found it the very last second that I possibly could. Read it, nailed it, stuck my landing like a young Simone Biles. How dare I compare myself with that amazing young lady who over the weekend in a competition completed some kind of, did you see that? Simone Biles, the gymnast. She did like 47 flips and nobody has ever done that. Even off of a cliff dive. Yeah, it was pretty impressive. It was a pommel horse. She's great. Oh, wait, there's one more clip. I forgot I pulled this one earlier. It was the first thing I saw this morning. And this is one of the advantages with me actually doing the program in the morning. You get that much more, a few more hours, the late night shows. And on Axios on HBO, Jonathan Swan, who does a great job, I think, interviewing powerful people. He had Liz Cheney on, and this is so important because Liz Cheney makes this infuriated me. She's so upset about the big lie, and yet she is carrying out the beginning of the big lie, or the most consequential part of the big lie is that our election system are broken. It's rigged, and it's rigged by Democrats and black people and black cities, okay? And so all of these states are now passing new laws to make it harder for those folks to vote. Liz Cheney tries to say, A, that they aren't. Jonathan Swan says, why are we doing this to begin with? And she carries out the most important part of this. This makes her so much worse in my mind, because Republicans are using the big lie to help themselves maintain power and get reelected, even though they have such minority status in this country. And Liz Cheney is doing just that, because the policy consequences, or the election consequences, results that are going to be possible as a result of the policy changes. I mean, listen to this.
You don't see any linkage between Donald Trump saying the election's stolen and then Republicans in all of these state legislatures rushing to put in place these restrictive voter laws?
Well, I think you have to look at the specifics of each one of those efforts. I think if you look at the Georgia laws, for example, there's been a lot that's been said nationally about the Georgia voter laws that turns out not to be true.
But even the Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Jeff Duncan, said that there was, when this bill started to pick up momentum was when Rudy Giuliani was testifying that the Georgia election was a sham. I don't think anyone doubts that the reason 400-some voting bills have been introduced, 90% by Republicans, supported by the Republican National Committee. I don't think it's a coincidence after the election that this has happened.
Look, I think everybody should want a situation and a system where people who ought to be able to vote and have the right to vote can vote.
Yeah, we have that system. We're actually trying to help other people that lost their right to vote, former felons, get the right to vote. This is crazy.
And people who, don't, shouldn't. And again, I come back to things like
But what problem
voter
are
ID.
they solving for? What are all these states doing?
No, I think, each state is different.
What was the big problem in Georgia that needed to be solved by a new law? What was the big problem in Texas? What was the big problem in Florida? These laws are coming all around the states, and what are they solving for?
I think you've got to look at each individual state law. But I think what we can all agree on...
You can't divorce them from the context.
Well,
come on.
yeah, but I think what we can agree on is that what is happening right now is really dangerous. And
I can agree with that.
I think Jonathan Swan might be saying, yeah, right now, in terms of what you're saying, you're carrying out the big lie. I just asked you to name the problem these laws are solving in any one of these states, and you can't do it. You can't do it because there isn't a problem. The problem is how many Americans whose vote you've taken away, not people who aren't American or who are dead or who are lying voting. That isn't a problem in any election outcome anywhere in America. And she knows it.
I think about 2000, think about sitting on the inaugural platform in January of 2001, watching Al Gore. Of course, we had won. I'm sure he didn't think he had lost. Mm-hmm. We had fought this politically very, very intense battle, and he conceded. He did the right thing for this nation. And that is one of the big differences between that and what we're dealing with now and the danger of Donald Trump today.
No. You can't tell us that the reason she explained that, when her dad, by the way, became the vice president and did help rig that election. Oh, the ironies, the hypocrisies, rather. What she is saying is the problem is that Donald Trump is still saying that the election is rigged and that he won't concede. But no, the problem is the fact that he's saying the election is rigged, and Americans think that and get behind these voter ID laws, these voter suppression laws that she is arguing and advocating for. Don't you see? All right, let me bring my blood pressure down and yours with it by taking a beat here before we get to the news dump. Take it away, Pico.
Last segment has you tearing out your hair in clumps. Let's hope for something better on today's news dump.
Collaboration with listener Carrie Williams on that one, Pico. Very well done. Thank you very much. Yeah, the news can be tough, but we've got to know what is happening in the world around us so that we can change it. That's at least what I think, but always good to take breaks from it. And let's start then with everything else I didn't fit in the first segment, rapid fire news headlines. It is your news dump for Monday, May 24th, 2021. Brought to you by Noble Pies, noblepies.com. Go invest in Noble Pies, noblepies.com. All right, so these stories are going to get progressively better. I'll start with the worst and then make them better. But remember, there is infinite love happening all around you at all times. But here we go. The death toll in India has surpassed 300,000, now the third highest in the world. India, devastating surge of new infections appears to be easing in big cities, however. There were at least 12 mass shootings across the United States this weekend. That's right, a series of mass shootings over the weekend left at least 11 people dead and another 69 injured. Go to the Gun Violence Archive to learn more about those statistics. Illinois, New Jersey, Ohio, Indiana, South Carolina, Virginia, Texas, and Minnesota. A mass shooting in this case defined by an incident with 4 or more people killed or wounded by gunfire, excluding the shooter. So far, more than 7,500 people have died from gun violence across the U.S., according to the Gun Violence Archive. And guess what? There are lots of things that we can do about that, and you have to stay on top of it and active. Nearly 500 million people on the planet now have diabetes, though many have no idea, apparently. As one pandemic begins to fade away, a new study finds another is continuing to grip the entire world. Researchers find that almost 500 million people globally have diabetes, although many don't even know they have it. The number of cases has more than quadrupled since 1980, when there are around 108 million living with the condition. Without looking it up, I'm going to say it has a lot to do with our diets and all the garbage that we don't even know at times we're eating. Tennessee has moved to the forefront with anti-transgender laws. Conservative lawmakers in Tennessee have introduced a flurry of anti-LGBT bills this year, and it's horrifying. Like I said, though, these are getting less and less horrifying. Over the weekend, Saturday in Huntington Beach, California, over 2,500 people, over 2,000 people went to a birthday party for some TikTok star who I don't even want to mention. I don't even know who it is. Anyway, your kids probably do. 149 were arrested after the beach party went viral. So that's something we're probably going to increasingly see. Summer travel is going to require picking your way through a maze of border rules. The unvaccinated could potentially get into the U.S. if that's added to an EU whitelist that currently features 8 countries, including New Zealand and Israel, with low COVID-19 rates. Moving on, I thought this was an interesting story. Apparently, rural counties in liberal Oregon voted to join conservative Idaho. Okay, I wonder why that would be a major problem in our country. Woo! Finally, 2 stories that are a little bit better. A study is showing that now dogs can detect COVID-19 positive arrivals to airports. Dogs can be trained to detect more than 90% of COVID-19 infections, even when patients are asymptomatic, according to research published Monday, which authors hope could help replace the need to quarantine and new arrivals. Oh my gosh, we've got to get more of these dogs, breed these dogs as quickly as we did the vaccine, can we? And finally, a really good news story. A great-grandmother earned her college degree and was awarded it over the weekend. Vivian Cunningham is a great-grandmother of 3. She earned her undergraduate degree in liberal arts studies at Alabama's Samford University. Vivian Cunningham is 78 years old. And that is your news dump, everybody. And now it's time to get to my guest, but I want to make sure I mention my sponsor, Indeed.com/standup is the link I'd love for you to go to if you're looking to hire for your company and you need a great short list of quality candidates. Go to Indeed.com/standup. That is not the official read, but I do want to just plug that because I appreciate them sponsoring this podcast. So if you could go to that link, that'd be awesome. And now I want to introduce you to today's only guest. We had a great conversation. He's been on once before, but I was really impressed with his scholarship and with his book and with his ability to communicate everything as the expert that he is. He's a professor of sociology and environmental studies at New York University. He's the author of 2 books. Most recently, it's Up to Heaven and Down to Health, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. Professor Dr. Colin Geraldmack joins me, and he also wrote a book about pigeons, which is really interesting. He's an ethnographer, meaning he goes and he lives amongst the community and learns about them and writes about them. And he's also obviously a professor. He's a dad. He is a husband, and he's on Twitter at Geraldmack. By the way, Jerolmack. Learn more about him in the show notes. Had an awesome conversation with this guy. Really, really enjoyed it. Learned more about him and his family and himself, so that I think that you all will enjoy listening to this conversation, the way that his brain thinks, and his knowledge base is just so extensive on so many different issues. So I was excited to have him back on the show, and I look forward to having him join me more regularly here on Stand Up. And here now is my conversation with Colin Geraldmack. All right, he is back. This is his book, Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. My favorite new guest, Professor Dr. Colin Geraldmack, is joining me. You and your brother are scientists, I read.
Yes. Yeah, he's an earth scientist at University of Pennsylvania.
What did your family do right? I mean, that seems like... do you have other siblings?
I have an older brother who's an organic farmer in Maine.
Oh, that's so cool. I can't believe right before we hit record, I was kind of talking to you about gardening and telling you how it is. And now I find out.
Well, I should be talking to him, but he's so big time. He's like out there with like 40 acres and stuff. Like, I'm not going to bother him with gardening tips.
Well, that's that would be so unbelievably presumptuous and condescending. What does he grow? What does he do?
He grows he's all kinds of vegetables. So he uses, even though he's in Maine, which gets pretty cold, he now has like acres of greenhouses. So he'll start tomatoes in February and like with heaters in the greenhouse, and he'll extend the greenhouse on the other end with heat. So all kinds of organic produce. His main customers, he sells like 90% of his business is selling to restaurants in Portland, Maine.
Local. Yeah. My big question about it, I'd love to talk to him at some point. Yeah. Maybe he'd agree to do an interview, but
totally.
One of the things, the economics of it is really kind of complicated and difficult to understand, but to do the right thing by the soil, by the environment, is to not make much of a profit margin. True fault somewhere in between. It feels like
he more or less volunteers to live in poverty. He's doing okay. He doesn't have that many needs. He built his own house. But yes, he and the only way he could even afford the property to start it is, he of course had to borrow money, and it had a lien on the property that it can't be developed, right? So it was this nice program at the part of Maine where they want to preserve farmland,
right?
But otherwise he wouldn't even be able to afford the property to start doing it. And yeah, you don't make a lot of money.
That's a problem, though. The economics about it is all wrong. We can talk about being environmentally conscious, but and just a certain sense of morality and being in sync with the rest of the ecology. But I'm just talking about climate change. And if we want to fight climate change, we have to be able to do a different kind of agriculture, farming. And it seems like it's impossible for the most well-intentioned people to make any money doing it. That's what I'm saying. That's the problem.
Yeah, you're right. And even on the small scale, if you look at the restaurants he's selling to in Portland, he's not selling to the fast food restaurants, right? He's selling to the fancy high-end restaurants. It's great that they want to do that. But even, the average person living in and around Portland is not going to these restaurants. These are like restaurants vying for Michelin stars, And
there's only just so much cilantro one can grow for these places. I'm trying to think of what they buy. I wanted to talk to you about, obviously, your latest article in the New Republic about fracking and all of what you have covered so extensively. But I also just wanted to dig into your kind of academic coursework. I thought it would be interesting for listeners to hear about what you're teaching, because I was thinking about you, and you have your undergrad, you have your bachelor's in psychology, your doctorate in sociology, you teach environmental studies, you've written this book about fracking, and it's, when you watch a cable news segment, when you watch a debate on these issues, you must just be so frustrated knowing that there's so much in terms of ecology and environment, sociology, psychology, economics that all go into this, and yet it's all boiled down and simplified into one stupid black and white binary argument.
Yeah.
Can you watch those? I mean, am I right that that's what happens what do you think when you see these types of arguments being had?
Yeah, I mean, you actually captured. Oh, I should say, I never watch cable news, like never, nor network news. It's not on. But your point is still taken. I mean, the first thing, and maybe this is why I've not been better at like being one of those talking heads, is that I try to be humble about what I don't know. And so even with, I have a PhD, it's true. My PhD is in sociology. It's not. So I wrote a book about fracking. I'm not a geologist as far as I need to rely on other people to tell me how fracked fluid can or can't move through the rock to get into people's drinking water, right? I'm also not an economist, so like I have a sense of what is possible with moving to renewable energy, but I feel very hesitant before I can definitively say, oh, that's bullshit. This isn't going to cost us, any jobs to move to renewable. Like I feel like I don't. So I always feel like I need to research more of the issue. I think it's also why when I do choose to write and speak, like with this book, it's not actually based out of largely my expertise in that I learned through getting a PhD. It's through living with other people and talking to other people, and that's what I tried to bring into it. So, and this
you guys are all wrong about that, and I'll tell you why. Because
I know
because the game is the game. It's what it is.
I know.
And so if you're not going to go on CNN, I am.
Yeah.
And
well, that's not bad, by the way.
It is because the point is these segments, you're going to talk maybe 2-3 minutes.
Yeah.
I was on CNN, their financial show every week. Their financial show. I have an associate's degree in liberal arts and I'm a stand-up comedian. No business talking about it, but I'll talk to an expert for an hour on this show, and then I would be able to do the 2 minutes on credit default swaps and come up with a metaphor or analogy. But I never have had any credibility. I still don't. That's why someone like you shouldn't come in with that. It's 2 minutes. You can give the best answers, and what we need are the smartest possible people, and we've learned that a lot. They've gotten better through the public health emergency that is COVID. They have, and some other issues, but they still, could do so much better. So, everybody in academia should be on these shows, and people like you who communicate well, and would be the best people to do it. So I think you shouldn't think that way.
Well, thank you.
As long as I'm out there doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And you know what? I'm trying a little more. I mean, I'm writing these op-eds now. That's not something that I've done in my first 12 years of being a professor.
So what do you teach? Environmental studies at NYU. Like, what do you teach and who do you teach, and what faith or lack of faith does that give you in the next generation?
So I teach. So I just finished, for instance, this semester teaching a course called Environmental Justice and Inequality. And so it's a course that really puts, and now environmental justice has been a buzzword lately, which it's about time, but really incorporating, we can't tackle environmental problems in a way that ignores structural racism and, the problems that we haven't grappled with for hundreds of years. And so that's a course that looks a lot at, on the one hand, it just empirically takes a look at the ways that environmental bads, if you will, hazardous waste facilities and the like, are disproportionately placed in poor and minority neighborhoods. And then a lot of it looks at the activist movement that emerged, traces the history of the environmental justice movement, which actually was in part a rejection of mainstream environmentalism, right? Like Sierra Club and all that was great, but it was basically like save the animals, save these national parks. And a bunch of people in the city saying, well, what the hell? We're the ones with shorter life expectancies getting asthma because we're breathing in all these dirty air and drinking this dirty water in lead pipes. But you don't see that as environmental protection. And so we look at the sort of conflict between mainstream environmentalism and environmental justice and ways that people have tried to reconcile that. So that's a course that I teach. I teach a course called Animals in Society, about human-animal relations and how they're shaped by social, political, and economic forces. As we talked a little bit about last time, my first book was on pigeons, actually, and I helped create an animal studies master's program at NYU.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah. so we do a lot on that. I also teach a huge introductory course, Introduction to Sociology.
I want to ask you about animal studies real quick. I'm trying to think of the name of this other book, and I'm looking around because I think it might be in here. But Richard... are you familiar with Richard Louve's
Wild
Calling?
The Last Child in the Woods?
Well, Last Child in the Woods was his first book, and an amazing book, and my introduction to his work. But his most recent book, Our Wild Calling, is about the role that people's pets and experiences with wildlife have played in people's lives. And then there's this other book by a guy who's a professor at Stony Brook, I think. He's a pretty well-known guy, and I can't think of his name all of a sudden. And he wrote about animals having feelings kind of thing. Based on science, or at least I don't know if it's science or not. But I wondered what you thought of both those books, but now I can't even think of the title of the second one. So, but what is the animals in society? What's an example of something we learn in there? That sounds fun.
So one of the things we focus on is the creation of dogs as pets, and how that started, and tracing that out. And, and for instance, people didn't really start keeping dogs as pets until the aristocracy in England and France started doing so as ornamental, like that, to have a literal lap dog that you show your wealth by being wealthy enough to feed food and take care of this frivolous animal, right? That for other people, they only had a dog if it was doing something for them, was shepherding the sheep, was catching mice, right? And so there was this period where having pets was a status symbol, which of course it still can be today. But the middle and the lower classes actually were not even allowed to keep pets in some places. So we look at the emergence of pets and how that happened, right? And then more recently, by the way, then on the other end, taking it into the modern era where the sort of phenomenon of pets now being surrogate children. And you see this sometimes literally, where combining with other sociological trends. So people are having kids later and later, and couples are cohabitating before they get married, or not getting married at all. So if the two major groups that are spending the most money on pets are adult couples that don't have children yet, and empty nester grandparents. So you are seeing like literal child substitution, right? Where people who are spending the most money on their pets are people that either are going to have kids, and this is a trial run, or people whose kids are grown, and now these pets are acting as substitute children. Right?
So I thought of the perfect question for you then. You have degrees in psychology, sociology, you teach environmental studies, including a course called Animals in Society. So what are we to think of these therapy animals?
Yeah, well, are you
going to make fun of them at all? At some of the ridiculous ones, or are all of them equal and valid and help people?
This is where I Pete, I really try to be careful to do both. So the first thing I do is just describe this phenomenon without judging it. And part of me as a sociologist.
Oh, what's that like? I don't know I don't know how to do that. That sounds mature and thoughtful.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start there. Cool.
So, but it's so part of it is that, so what I might do there is we're in this sort of moment where animals have won their way into our lives. We allow them on planes, we allow them, in hotels, and basically a lot of people have sort of argued for exactly.
My dog walked in like we were talking about this.
You were saying into the studio.
A lot of people argued for. Sorry.
So a lot of people have basically argued for first it started with pets, but basically allowing, it used to be, if you think about maybe our parents' generation, at least typically the dog slept outside, right? In the doghouse. I mean, we even have all these phrases that are now outdated. Oh, I'm in the doghouse with my wife. There is no doghouse anymore. They sleep in our beds, right?
I was thinking about that the other day. Exactly? Sometimes you'll see a doghouse at someone's house. And I remember them when we were little, for sure, but nobody puts their dog outside anymore.
And now you judge them. If you see a dog, if that dog is actually tied with a rope to the doghouse, you're like, I am calling the SPCA, or maybe the police. Maybe this is a 911 emergency. I'm just going to...
These people have their dog and their cat, strangely, tied up. Wow.
It's to say that, so one of the things we've seen is, and it started with pets, but we basically argued and won the rights of pets onto planes, into our beds, into restaurants, hotels. And so I think with that has kind of gone this attitude, well, why not these other animals too, right? Whether they're, and whether they're like cockatoos or potbelly pigs. And at the same time, I think there's also this other trend where it used to be that going to therapy was something that was taboo, that people didn't really talk about. Not that many people did. Now everybody's in therapy, and we're all encouraged to tell everybody about our psychological problems and expect accommodations for them. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but for instance, I mean, as a professor, I get these accommodation letters from students, they say they've gone and gotten a diagnosis of something, so I need to give them extra time on tests or whatever. When I even started teaching 15 years ago, it's like I maybe got one accommodation letter in a class of 50. Now in a class of 50, I might get 12 or 15 of them.
I don't even know what this is because I'm so far from academia. Yeah. But the context you're saying, the students request accommodations, special circumstances for whatever their need, their set of needs, their special, unique set of needs are.
Right. And so they will say, this student has this particular issue. Sometimes it's physical, usually it's mental. And so do you need to give them extra time on an assignment? You need to, whatever it is. And so I tailor. And so, and again, a lot of those are valid, but we live in accommodation nation now. Everybody is expecting their accommodation. So therapy pets are really just a tiny part of this whole thing, and why not? On its own, it sounds ridiculous, but we're accommodating people's demands and needs for so many others. So there's this kind of collision, I think, of the rise in therapy and conversations around therapy and expectations of accommodations depending on people's particular issues. And then a rise of pets and animals sort of winning their way into our homes and into our other domestic spheres that just kind of all come together with this, therapy animal thing.
That's fascinating. Can we kind of agree though on just my threshold is as long as your animal's not annoying. If you do have a bird or something, well, no one should have birds, right? As pets.
Yeah.
Should people can I have a bird? It seems wrong.
Well, if we're going to get into this, this is where I say I separate out, so if I talk about the descriptive versus the normative. If we don't talk normative, I'm vegan. So if you ask me, no, you should not. I don't really think we should be using or exploiting animals in almost any way. Now, there are some people that argue you shouldn't even be keeping dogs and cats. You spay or neuter them. You are taking away their animality. I'm not that hardcore. I think it's worth you could think about in a utilitarian way, are you bringing more pain than joy into their life? Right. I don't think so. I think we have enough evidence now, actual scientific evidence about their emotional well-being and states. But no, I don't think you should be keeping a bird.
How long have you been vegan?
22 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time to be vegan because it's a newer. My brother has been, actually he's not anymore. I think he's mostly vegetarian, not fully vegan, but that's what was the catalyst? I know we're all over the place, but I'm really fascinated by you. I'm going to come back to.
Well, I should say, so I was vegetarian first, and how I became. There's two main things that led to me being vegetarian. One, when I was in elementary school and middle school, me and my older twin brother and my older brother on a whim mail ordered some chickens without my parents' permission, cash on delivery. We lived in the suburbs, built them a little coop. And for years we had pet chickens. And so then it was it was much more visceral than when we're getting served chicken for dinner. And I'm worried because my pet chicken is still out and it's after dark. And is a raccoon going to get them? Why am I so upset that this raccoon might catch that chicken when it has no other choice? That's what it's eating. And I'm eating this. And so there was that. And like a lot of people, I kind of just lived with that inconsistency for a while. I didn't act on it. I was 11. When I started becoming a teenager, I got really into political activism generally through punk rock music. So I started participating in political issues, particularly one of the big ones in the Philadelphia area at the time was around the alleged wrongful conviction of this Black activist Mumia Abu-Jamal. Oh, yeah. And so I got really involved in that. And there was a huge sort of strand of hardcore punk rock that was vegan and that would preach veganism and that would relate veganism to animal exploitation. So I became vegetarian in high school. And then pretty much once I was vegetarian for ethical reasons, the more, back then, of course, there wasn't the internet, or I didn't have the internet anyway. So it wasn't as easy to just know and see images of dairy cows and egg laying hens. But so once I started to find out about what was happening there, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this for ethical reasons, eggs. So they kill every male chick because male chicks that are born don't grow up to lay eggs.
Right.
So that's actually a lot of killing involved to give me my eggs. So I can't do that either.
I love it. I love all of it. I love that journey. It's fascinating and important. It sounds very similar to my brother's, including the Mumia stuff. I learned about him when I was like as a teenager, I think, or late teens. So last question along those lines. I just want, I got some caller on the old radio show called in, and he's a hunter, and I was giving him grief. I was like, I was just being a dick, like kind of trying to be funny. I was like, you like just shooting harmless, defenseless animals. And he's like, motherfucker, you eat meat. You go to the grocery store and buy animals. And so I'll never forget that, because he hit me. He pinged me so hard. He was so right. So my question to you is, those of us who eat meat, eat animals, and then judge hunters, I think we're the worst along those lines, right? Like, that's the worst kind of, so I don't do that anymore. I mean, I respect hunters, or I think I don't have any leg to stand on as long as I'm eating, and I don't eat much meat, but I mean, as long as I'm still eating animals, I can't be a jerk about some guy who's sitting in the woods all day, kills a deer, and then eats it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know why I needed you to decide on my moral judgment on that, but pretty obvious. Your new article in the New Republic is, speaking of comparing people in different categories of life and having overlaps. Boy, that was a tough segue to try to make, but I pivoted. And it's really interesting because, of course, you wrote this awesome book, which we talked about the last time you were on, Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, where you spent a whole bunch of time with folks in Pennsylvania. And this article talks about at least one of them and the movement with fracking. So first of all, tell us what happened most recently in California with fracking and why that matters before we come back to Pennsylvania.
Sure. Yeah. So Governor Gavin Newsom put through an executive order which bans new oil and gas leases after 2024. And the reason why I'm careful in saying that is people are calling it a fracking ban. It's unfortunate. It's not, at least not yet. What that means is after 2024, no new lands that were not already leased for oil and gas drilling can be potentially happen for a decade or more there with existing oil and gas leases. But it is significant in that, New York banned fracking in 2014. And since then, there's not really been much state action around the issue. So it's the most significant state action taken since New York in a state that produces a fair amount of oil and gas.
And I think the reason that matters is because, as you just said, New York in 2014, and now you look at a state like Pennsylvania, where I feel like we don't hear as much about Californians and property rights and fracking out there, and they don't have all the experience now that Pennsylvanians have. I may be wrong about California, but in Pennsylvania, you've got kind of the full spectrum of the experience, from selling your land off to seeing the rigs come in, to frack, to all of the activism around it, and really to what you talk a lot about in both your book and this article, the fine print or the broken promises. And what's happening is activists who have always been environmentalists or anti-fracking are now seeing common ground with, maybe hardcore right-wing conservative people who have sold their land to the fracking companies. And how are we seeing that, and why does it matter?
Yeah. So how we're seeing that, and I know I talked about him a bit last time on your show, so I'll try to be brief, but he's also the sort of star of this article. But it's always easy to tell the story with one person. This guy, George Hagemeyer, who I came to know, leased his land, was very gung-ho about it, was proud to be contributing to energy independence. When I asked him if he thought, did you talk to any of your neighbors before you leased your land because they might experience contamination or truck traffic? He said, no, it's my land. I don't owe anybody an explanation. I don't have to tell anybody anything, let alone he doesn't care about the planetary consequences about that, right? And when he got his first check for the royalties, I don't blame him. I mean, $34,000 for 1 month of production. Took a stretch limousine to come talk to my class. And when I talked to him about how are your relationships with the gas company, Pete, I should just say, by the way, I see you laughing. of course he wanted to show off his money, but part of it too was he said, like, this is my first and last visit to New York City. There's no way in hell I'm driving into that shithole. And so somebody else is going to drive for me. And he showed up right before my class. The limo waited outside. As soon as class was over, he left. And he said he's never coming back. So that was his one trip to New York City.
Well, I mean, the point of that, too, is he loves his land. He loves rural areas. And a lot of people feel the same way about cities, including and especially New York City. And what happened to his land is it got, I'm not going to say destroyed, but it got noisy, and it got not to be so much his land that he, cherished so much that he would, go through with what you just said, to visit your class, to go to New York City. So yeah, what I don't know where you dropped off about his story there.
So his land. So his father farmed it, and then his father died when he was 2 years old. So he never knew his dad. He's the youngest of 7 siblings, but that makes it to him all the more meaningful that he's the one that inherited the land. He talks about it all the time as his daddy's land, and so. He was very gung-ho about leasing. He even said, like, Anadarko, which was the company that drilled, when I first met him, he said, they should make me a spokesperson for them. I'm just so excited about what they're doing. And then when I invited him to my class, and this is really the moment, is it happened when he came to my class. I brought him to my class to speak about, to bring the perspective of somebody who supports drilling. And he says to my class, I shouldn't have done it. What would my daddy say if he saw what they did to this land? And the real thing about it that gets to the nub of how there's these connections that environmentalists can pick up on is George even hired a lawyer. He did not sign the lease himself. He did hire a lawyer, but you are dealing with a multi-billion-dollar company. They have all kinds of ways to make you sign a lease where you do not understand the fine print. Even his lawyer doesn't understand the fine print. So he had no idea that signing a lease basically meant he is now a tenant that has to ask the gas company's permission to do things on his own property. He finds out they're going to withdraw water, thousands of gallons a day from the creek by his house, when he reads about it in the newspaper.
That was a crazy line in this article. I actually went back and read that twice because I really thought I misread it. I thought he knew that was part of the deal. That's why they were doing it there, because they need the water, and that's why it's such a rich place. But then I read it again. I'm like, oh wait. They took all this water, and he didn't know they were going to. That's right. Your stream. A lot of us dream, fantasize, and even build our own streams to have, and you can only imagine how important that was to him. And yet now they're sucking it dry.
Yeah, and also there's a security guard stationed at his driveway because it's an active industrial site, and as if that's not enough. And of course, he didn't know there was going to be a security guard there. One day he's driving home, and the security guard steps in front of him with a stop sign and says, you have to come back later. Like, from a safety perspective, it makes sense. They're moving heavy trucks in and out. Yeah. But can you imagine your own driveway, and there's a security guard hired by a petroleum company telling you, I'm sorry, you need to come back later.
If someone... First of all, if it was one of those stop signs, like a crossing guard stop sign with a small handle, if someone walked in my driveway and held up one of those little stop signs, I would find it to be the most violent action you could take on my little tiny stop sign. Sir, sorry, you're going to have to stop here. That's my house. How typical is Georgia's situation?
Typical. There were some people who, however it was, the connection to somebody else, learned more and understood that you could negotiate where you put a driveway, where you put a well pad, what hours you can access. I don't know how to put a percentage on it, but I would say probably over 80% of people got none of those and didn't know that was a possibility. The way the industry talks about it is there's a standard lease, and what we're offering you is the standard lease, which implies there's nothing else you can do. And so George became, and a lot of people felt like this, that they became a tenant on their own property, right? And so that's where I think, the problem, so people like George, when this happens, they're not happy about it. They're very pissed. But because they're anti-government regulation, their kind of response is to try to sue, right? It's like, I'm going to sue this company for what they're doing. And so what I'm trying to say is that this is something where when environmentalists that I saw, if they ever bothered to try to approach people like George, what they would just say is, well, we got to ban fracking. Join with us. We're trying to ban fracking. George doesn't want to ban the idea of banning anything. I mean, George, for better or worse, thinks that people shouldn't have to wear a helmet when they drive their motorcycle. He doesn't even ride a motorcycle, but he's still pissed about the rule. Because if you want to like destroy your head, of course, that's not just a private problem though, because I pay taxes on that person's head being destroyed if they don't have insurance when they drive it. But George just basically is a libertarian. Everybody do what they want, right? But on the other hand, if environmentalist approaches said, well, what if we push for particular policies like gas companies, like pushing legislators to create rules around what you can and can't do on a lease, or disclosure that has to be upfront and bold of what this lease would allow you to do. There's a lot of things that I think landowners like George would get on board with. But when they hear just the so-called fractivists saying we just want to ban all this stuff, they're not really down with that.
I think
so the last thing I'll say is where I get these sort of what I'm saying is this possibility of odd connections is I think a lot of environmentalists don't want to emphasize land rights and local control over land use because they rightfully, I think, understand that that's not going to solve climate change. Like we really do need major federal and state regulations to just say we're going to ban fossil fuel extraction. So they just focus on what they think needs to be done. But where environmentalists do very much stringently support sovereignty of individuals who own the land is with Native American tribes. And I don't mean to equate them. There's a very different history, of course, an awful history of settler colonialism. But what it means is that even there are some tribal nations that are building pipelines and making money from doing it. There are some that support oil and gas drilling, and environmentalists basically will not criticize them. And they are not fighting for bans in tribal nations because they understand that no, you are a separate entity that deserves your own sovereignty. And so what I'm suggesting is what's really interesting is despite how different they are politically and their histories, what we see is with people like George and Native Americans, there's this intense love of ancestral land, often that has been in the family and the community for generations.
Right.
And there's this belief that the fossil fuel industry is trampling over our rights on this land. And environmentalists have found a way to have it to accommodate that desire for local control and local sovereignty when connecting to tribal nations. And I'm suggesting that they could do the same with rural landowners.
Have you, talked about or seen the local environmental movements in places like Pennsylvania or anti-fracking movements in general start to understand this? Have you tried to talk to them and ask them if this is an effort that they understand? I mean, it might not have worked before all these landowners now have the results and the consequences of what's happened on their land, but we have enough time has passed, enough holes have been drilled into people's property, enough trucks have destroyed the roads and the noise and the water and the smell and all the things where you would think now, sadly, that it's all this has passed and this damage has been done, that there would be an overlap. What do you think the organizations, local community organizations are doing to try to reach out to these landowners that they used to be on opposite sides of the town hall on?
That's right. Yeah, I am seeing some of it. I can't say that I feel like it's been like a sea change, but I mean, the one organization that I talk about in the book, Responsible Drilling Alliance, which is based out of Williamsport, and in particular, the person who was the co-founder and president, Ralph Kisberg, he's doing that work, and other people in the organizations are doing that work. And what's really telling is, so Ralph Kisberg, who was the president of this group, he's the one that introduced me to George. So Ralph, what he would do is just like drive around on back roads, and when he saw well pads and drilling rigs, would just pull over and walk up to the door and start chatting with the owner. And he wouldn't say anything. He wouldn't lie. I mean, if they asked, he would say, I run this group, Responsible Drilling Alliance. But he would say, I just want to talk to you about your experiences with the industry. And then what he would do is, if they had, so for instance, with George, it took him a while before he started getting his royalty checks. So Ralph connected George to somebody he knew in the oil and gas industry who helped him figure out when he would get royalties. There was somebody else who leased their land but was really upset when it looked like the well pad was going to go right next to their barn. So Ralph started attending meetings between the landowner and the gas company to help try to push to get the well pad put somewhere else. But what's really telling about this is that when Ralph introduced me to George said to me, I just hope you're not one of those environmentalists. I don't want to talk to those guys. So like he didn't see Ralph as an environmentalist because Ralph just, and the thing is Ralph was very clear. Ralph would be critical of the industry. He would tell George of things he could do to try to fight against what was happening, but he didn't preach to him. And he never talked about big things like a ban on fracking or whatever. He just talked about particular problems that George was facing and how to possibly remedy those problems. And so, you know, there are people like him that are doing that work.
That's super smart. Yeah.
I think, yeah, it is.
He must be, first of all, I want to talk to Ralph Kissberg. You got to get me.
He is.
But
Yes.
second of all, he's got to be an older man because a younger man would not have that approach. I'm guessing. That's a wise person that knows how to win, you know, just not, I don't even know. I don't want to make any assumptions about what his agenda was, but you're making him sound like an environmentalist. So, I have certain ones, but I mean, just that approach is how it's got to be. You got to meet people where they're at.
Right. And I think, I mean, the one thing I will say is, and the thing is, I'm curious to see if this changes, is, you know, there's such a political polarization now that it can be hard to see people as people. I mean, that's an obvious point. But for instance, like there were folks I would sit down with, so landowners that would say, I would say, you know, did you ever talk to the Responsible Drilling Alliance, which was the local group that Ralph was a part of? And someone would say, oh, you know, they're wackos. I'm not going to talk to them. They, you know, but then that landowner would proceed to tell me all the things, you know, I just think we got to get the trucks off these roads. We should have water pipelines on the side of the road. I think they got to make the setback of gas wells from a house further away. And then I would say, you know, these are all the positions that the Responsible Drilling Alliance is advocating for. So it's like they had a caricature in their mind already of what this group was like based on what they think environmentalists are like. So they couldn't even see that the message of this group was actually aligned with what they want, or a lot of the messages of the group. And that's where what made Ralph so powerful. I mean, part of it was his approach, but the biggest thing is that he did the shoe leather work. He drove around for hours and got out. He wasn't writing an opinion piece hoping that like some rural landowner would read it and be like, oh, he's right. You know, it's like he is going out and literally, you say meet people where they're at, literally on their
I prefer to change hearts and minds from the shed on Twitter. My activism is social media posts, and I can't tell you how successful I've been at turning people around on their long held opinions, included on things that are deepest and most important, their soul and land. That's I mean, that's how it's got to be done. That's awesome. I really want to talk to this guy. It's where do you think the fracking industry is at? Because the secrets are all out of the bag. The scams, the way they take advantage of landowners, the results, as you write in this article, there's fewer commas in the royalty check, so there's even less money if there's. So where is the frack? And now you've got the activism has taken over kind of the mainstream. Governments around the world are really seemingly understanding the science. I saw you tweeting about the International Energy Agency saying we have to stop right now to meet our goals by 2050 burning fossil fuels. I mean, some of the mainstream, most capitalist organizations in the world are seeing what's happening. And arguably, the economics have obviously changed, so they're not doing it for all the right reasons. But what about natural gas? What about fracking? Where are we at? Is there any way to give a kind of general, larger conclusion on where they're at right now, Colin?
Yeah, and just to be clear, the fracking industry is the petroleum industry. All the major players are the same, you know, are whether they're fracking gas or oil, it's, you know, Shell, Chevron, Exxon.
Got it.
They're scared. They're really scared. I mean, and so much so, you know, that I mean, there's been some articles, kind of snarky ones, but they're right, that like the CEO of Shell's daughter is embarrassed at what her dad does and like won't tell anybody what her dad does, right? Because like, I mean, the younger generation in particular, like,
that's
no
interesting.
longer, like, I talk to students that are, you know, now at NYU, I talk to students, like even business school students, and they're just like, you know, there's no way I can work for a company not only that does this, but is investing in companies that do this. And these are even students that are not my environmental studies students. These are just like, you know, normal young people that, I mean, it is.
It's like having your child play football.
Right.
It's a stain. Exactly. No, that's really interesting. Then you've got the divestment movement because, you know, so
you know,
it's
really interesting what's happening with the industry and the movement. And I want to talk with you a lot more about it. And I also want to talk with you more about environmental justice, how it relates to tribal folks and urban folks and a lot more. I just love talking to you, man. I've taken up enough of your time today, but let's do it again soon. Everybody read the article at the New Republic, all of these things, all of his Colin's latest work. It will be in the show notes. And of course, right now, go buy this very good book that you spent a lot of time working on, Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. Professor Colin Geraldmack, great to have you back. Thank you so much, man. Great talking to you. I love talking to you.
Please, I'll do this as much as you want, Pete. This is
cool.
This is awesome.
All right, there you go, Colin Geraldmack. I'm cultivating him. I'm trying very hard to take these brilliant professors and make them want to talk to me, and so that we can learn from them and not necessarily pay the tuition that NYU requires. And by the way, I asked him because my daughter's interested in NYU, and it's a very expensive school. I don't know how we could possibly ever afford it. Obviously, I'm going to need some more subscribers to this podcast, but I asked him if he could give her a tour, because I don't want to put any limits. We don't want to put limits on her. You know, there's all kinds of different ways. Who knows how you get into college or how you find money. I didn't want to put that limit on her. But NYU is in the West Village of New York City, and I asked him if he would give her a tour and if he would maybe let her audit his class. And he was overjoyed and offered more than that, and it was really generous and a great guy. And I think he reminds me of people like Dr. Carroll in the way that he is careful about how he talks and nuanced and non-judgmental. We talked about that. Was just great. So Colin Geraldmack, definitely follow him on Twitter and get his book Up to Heaven and Down to Hell, Fracking, Freedom, and Community in an American Town. We'll be talking to him a lot more. And I've also reached out to and am in touch with Ian Jerolmack, his brother, who has got that amazing organic farm up in Maine. I've got to share the video. I'll try to find that and share it in the show notes that I watched that is up on YouTube by his farm, and try to get him on. The Geraldmack brothers, great, exciting additions potentially to our amazing list of guests that join us every day here on Stand Up with Pete Dominick daily. That's right, I said it, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Until then, thank you for listening today. Tell your friends, be well. Check out the Discord platform if you are a subscriber, where the conversation is always going. You're never alone if you are a Stand Up with Pete Dominick community member. I love you. Speaking of which, one of our favorite, here he is, John Carroll. Take it away, brother.
When the tyrants taunt you and the sirens teach you, better stand up, stand up. Let the brave meet the challenge, let the weak flee. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up, stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.